Despite railway blockades, prominent and public calls for justice and demands for further investigation, efforts to force a public inquiry have stalled. Either way, an inquiry might not answer why as many as 1,000 Indigenous women have gone missing or have been murdered in the past few decades. Joining us now with more, in Regina, Saskatchewan, RCMP Assistant Commissioner Brenda Butterworth Carr. She's commanding officer for the province of Saskatchewan. In Sept-Îles, Quebec, via Skype, Michelle Oded, president of the Native Women's Association of Canada. In the nation's capital, Marion Pierce, University of Ottawa Doctorate of Law candidate. Back here in our studios, Catherine Hansel, attorney with Hansel Barristers in Toronto. Marianne Schufly, social worker with Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. And Bridgette Pierce, activist and co-founder of Sex Trade 101. And we are delighted to welcome you three here in our studio and our three guests and Points Beyond to our broadcast this evening. Let's start by sharing some numbers that you around this table and in Points Beyond are all too well aware of, but our viewers may not be. These numbers put together by Marion Pierce out of Ottawa and, of course, Native Women's Association of Canada. So here goes. From 1950 to 2014, missing and murdered women and girls in Canada, all Canadian women, slightly over 4,000. Aboriginal women, 883. Aboriginal women made up 21.8% of the cases tracked. Let's keep going. From the Native Women's Association of Canada, Aboriginal women represent just 3% of Canada's female population, but from 2000 to 2008, they represented 10% of female homicides in Canada, clearly a disproportionate amount. And only half, roughly, of murder cases involving Aboriginal women in Canada are solved. We want to explore that tonight. Michelle, let's bring you in here first. Why are Aboriginal women more likely than the rest of the population to go missing or be killed?
Well, there's many reasons, and of course, I'll say, coming from my heart and being involved with the Native women movement for the past 20 years, discrimination, racism, being marginalized every day, the extreme poverty that we're facing either in the community or in the urban setting, the vulnerability that brought us close to the violence, addiction, homelessness, prostitution for some of us, gang involvement, abuse, relationship. There's many layers of things that we have on our shoulder every day. And of course, when I say discrimination, we have to think about the Indian Act, the policies that are discriminating us. We have to think about the loss of land, the loss of language. So there's many targets towards Aboriginal people, mostly Aboriginal women.
Marion Pierce, that is an exhaustive list, but is there anything you would add to it?
No, I think that Michelle covered the wide spectrum of reasons why Aboriginal women and girls are vulnerable to violence.
Tell us this then. The estimates that I have read for Indigenous women in Canada either being murdered or going missing, there is quite a discrepancy. I've seen numbers that start at 600. I've seen numbers that go up as high as 3,000. Why such a discrepancy?
Well, I think that when everyone wants to try to compare numbers, and it's very difficult. It depends on the inclusion criteria, the length of time you're looking. For instance, what I did is for the current numbers that I provided you for this show, I started at 1950, but 70% of all of those 4,000 cases and 68% of the cases of Aboriginal women are from 1990 onward. It depends on the sources of information. If you're looking at primary sources like newspapers, if you go back to the archives, you're going to find a lot more cases. I was limited in what I could do basically from my home. So online sources, court cases and that type of thing are going to be more, there's going to be a bias towards the later cases. So you can't say that there are more homicides from 1990 onward, just that, for instance, in my case, I was able to collect more information from 1990 onwards.
Understood. All right, Catherine, I want to bring you in at this point because to the extent that Canadians know about this, I suspect it's because of a guy named Robert Pickton.
Yes.
We have a lot of new Canadians who watch this program, may not have been in the country when all of that happened. So I'm going to ask you, if you would, just to remind us what that case was all about.
Robert Pickton was a man from British Columbia who, from 1990 for several years afterwards at least, preyed on marginalized women living in the downtown east side of Vancouver. Dozens he killed at his farm outside of Vancouver. He killed dozens and dozens of women. His predation was largely unchecked, or was completely unchecked for many, many years, despite alarms going off on the part of the community, families. Many, many people brought forward the concern about individual missing women from the downtown east side, as well as a larger, once many women had gone missing, the very real impression they were getting, including on the part of police officers, that there was a serial killer at work. Well, it turns out there was, but it took an awful long time for police to take the reports of missing women seriously on the downtown east side.
Was there ever a final agreement on what the total number of victims was?
I believe it was 49, although Bridgette may correct me. Pickton himself claimed 49.
He admitted to 49, but they found more evidence of DNA left of other women that families didn't come up forth and report their loved one missing.
So it might have been more than 49.
Yeah, they were saying 69, and then they weren't sure about the DNA. We heard 200 at one point through the inquiry.
Was there a particular type of woman he preyed on in particular?
He chose women that were vulnerable, so they were drug addicted, women that were involved in prostitution, that were in survival prostitution, that were feeding their addictions. And he used other women to lure the women too.
Many Indigenous women, many Aboriginal women?
A lot of, most were Aboriginal.
Most. Do you remember, Marianne Schufly, your reaction when the facts of this case came out and you heard who the victims tended to be?
First thing that popped into my head was racism. And I think that that's something that, I mean, we know, but I think a bigger part of what impacts why, or what I was thought impacted why there wasn't any investigation centers on is patriarchy. You were asking earlier about some of the issues, and I think that plays a big role because it seems to govern a lot of practices that currently run and drive our systems that we have going in this country.
Patriarchy meaning what? When you say it, what do you mean?
There's a lot of rules, and just I think it ties into maybe sexism as well. So there's a lot of things that do contribute to, and we have a history of oppression and colonization. So the fact that Canada itself is a corporation and it has its own rules, a lot of these issues that we bring forward as First Nations people they won't fit within that system. So I have to wonder sometimes really what are the barriers for that system, or what are the criteria I think somebody was mentioning earlier, if that's really what's preventing some of this from moving forward.
Let me get Marion Pierce in Ottawa to respond to that as well. When you heard in the Pickton case the preponderance of the victims being Indigenous Canadians, do you remember what your reaction was at the time?
Actually, that's the reason I ended up going forward and doing my doctorate. I was horrified by the details that were coming out, and that spawned me to action, and not knowing what else to do, I decided to research and write that. I would like to add to one of the reasons I think that there was a lot of inaction at the beginning has to do with discrimination against sex workers and drug addicts, a feeling of perhaps second-class citizens and that sort of thing, but also a really firm misunderstanding of their lives and how they conducted themselves. I think the social workers and the police officers who were on the ground in the downtown east side, they were saying to their higher ups, no, these women do not, take a vacation. They do not run off to Calgary on a circuit. This is their home. This is where their dealers are. This is where they get their methadone. This is where their friends are. They're in contact with their family, and if they're not around, there is a good reason for it. We need to take this seriously. And others just thought they were gone away on their own volition, and they would turn up.
And they didn't.
Well, they did, but unfortunately, the remains of DNA of 33 women showed up on his farm.
Yes. Bridgette, this touched your life directly, yes, the Pickton case?
Yes.
How so?
My stepdaughters, their mother was Brenda Wolfe, and she was the first of the 6 murder charges that were laid on Pickton. And it was prevalent that there was a misinterpretation of who Brenda was. When I reported her missing, I basically was laughed at by the police officer. He didn't take it serious, and he had told me just to basically that I have the kids and I should just be happy with that. But I was raising 2 little girls at home that were every night questioning us about where their mom was and what was going on. So it was really frustrating. It was frustrating as a step-parent to watch it all unfold on the news. And it was frustrating having that interaction with Vancouver Police Department. In regards to my children's missing mother, they never ever even we felt really unhumanized. These were vulnerable women. These were women that society deemed as castaways. And, for us, people that were dealing with, the children of these women, it was very, very hard. We need to recognize that there's 98 children that were left orphaned from this man. And these 98 children now face the same vulnerability as their mothers have. So, it was a huge, hard time for our family, but it showed resilience in the children.
Apropos of your comments about law enforcement perhaps not taking seriously enough the details around the disappearances of these women, this feels like a good moment to go to Brenda, Butterworth, Carr in Regina. And Assistant Commissioner, obviously the details of the Pickton case would have been outside your jurisdiction, but these complaints you've heard before, and we wanted to have you on the program today to give you a chance to respond to them. So what would you say in response to that kind of criticism?
Yeah, so, there's definitely multi-jurisdictional, so it wasn't just the VPD. There was a huge inquiry that occurred as a result of, the awareness and what transpired, and, that's an extreme case of law enforcement and, the multi-jurisdictional issues, the transient population. I think it was summarized incredibly well. Some of the highlight points that were made already by the previous panel members around the vulnerability of the women and so forth. And I think, there were some significantly hard lessons learned. I certainly know that there is an ongoing matter. It is an ongoing matter. And from my perspective, and certainly organizationally, several people have acknowledged that and made apologies on behalf of the RCMP and our involvement. But I think more importantly, and just as importantly, if you will, it's, what are we doing about it? How are we responding? How are we raising awareness with our communities? How are we addressing the vulnerability of, many of our women across Canada as a society? And I think that, it's a true collaboration that needs to occur. We talk, and I've heard, with respect to the numbers, these are women. These are women that are missing and murdered, and that we have to concentrate on, dealing with the societal and systemic and social issues within our communities. I think that, it was summarized very eloquently right from the onset with regards to, the economic issues that we have within a lot of our communities. Access to health, access to addictions, if that, or treatment facilities if required, education. And just the basic life elements that the rest of Canadian citizens sort of take for granted.
No, all that is fair enough, but I wonder if I could get you to follow up on this aspect of our discussion, and that is, we have certainly heard on this program before, as I'm sure you have as well, that there are still too many people in law enforcement in this country today who see the disappearance or the investigation of, let's say, an Indigenous woman going missing or murdered, and they don't take it as seriously as they do if it were a white woman going missing or murdered. We've heard that. Could you respond to that?
No, and absolutely. And organizationally, we've certainly heard that too. But I can say on behalf of the RCMP, the initial research that we did and the collaboration that we have with the Native Women's Association of Canada, and certainly the research that Mary has conducted, and being able to reconcile the investigations of our outstanding homicide investigations, unsolved homicide investigations, or even our missing persons, there's a lot of energy that's gone towards ensuring that we're accountable, law enforcement specifically within the RCMP. We're looking at task forces that are in place, whether it's in British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, You know, I can speak candidly with regards to Saskatchewan and the fact that, you know, we have very consistent processes and how, when the complaints occur, we've got the layers of accountability. So we have a full-time coordinator that reviews every single one of our missing persons cases to ensure that it's done diligently, that as soon as that information comes into our custody, that it's followed up on. We immediately contact family and friends, and you know, we also have the provincial support. So within Saskatchewan in particular, we have a provincial partnership committee for missing persons. And so not only, and that's a multi-agency approach, so we have 17 different agencies.
Let's find out from Michelle Oded whether or not, in your understanding of things, whether you would acknowledge that the police have made progress, generally speaking, on the issues that we've just been talking about.
Well, I have to say that after all the pressure and the eyes coming from the international communities on the RCMP, just with the report of Human Rights Watch, I think they had, of course, to relook or redo things at the community level or with the people. One thing happened after we sat down 2 years ago after my election. The dialogue was just frank and new. But after that, after the pressure and after the media cover-up on about the relationship with the women and the RCMP, I'm glad to say that we had some collaboration. Still, it's not enough. It's not the fault on one side. It's just a matter of timing and also funding for NWAC. We lost the funding of Sister in Spirit initiative, Evidence to Action, same thing. We don't know if we're still going to be alive on that part for missing and murdered Aboriginal women. But I have to say also that with the Special Parliamentary Committee, as an example, who just presented a report not long ago, they didn't mention officially nothing on their recommendation to say that Canadian institution that we know as the RCMP, we should relook the legislation, the rules and the policy to make sure that each future police officer will have a training on Aboriginal history issue, who we are and where we want to go, and of course on Aboriginal women reality. If I was the government, I would force and reinforce that each officer of the RCMP. But it's not only on the RCMP reality. We have also to look. The municipality of Vancouver was a good example with the Opal Commission, but it's everywhere across Canada.
Okay, so, Michelle, I'm going to cut you off there just because we're starting to lose our Skype signal with you a little bit. We may need to reestablish that. In the meantime, Catherine, help us out on this. How have systemic issues, in your view, contributed to these disappearances or murders?
Okay, several of the guests on the panel have already commented on a number of systemic issues. There's two others that I'd like to bring forward, and the first is with respect to policing and responsiveness. It doesn't just affect whether the murders and the disappearances are solved. It affects the perception on the part of predatory men that if you want to, or you're of a mind to hunt and kill women, that Aboriginal women, if you want not to face the consequences of that, to be detected and prevented and arrested and jailed, that Aboriginal women are your safest bet.
Where do they get that in their head?
Well, look at the solve rate and look at the experience of not just Bridgette, but many, virtually all of the families involved, or the families of the victims of Robert Pickton, for example, and families across the country. Michelle can confirm this, and I'm sure all of our guests are familiar with the accounts of families that they were dismissed and even laughed at by police. And the solve rate for the investigations, and they're not as vigorously pursued. On the Trail of Tears, there was a series of disappearances and likely murders in northern BC on a highway they call the Trail of Tears. There was a tragic death, murder of a young tree planter, and she was white, and that made front page news. Dozens of Aboriginal women have gone missing along the same route without nearly the same resources or media attention.
Media are culpable as well.
Media are culpable. Mm-hmm. The other systemic issue that I'd like to point out, and I think Marianne Schufly can expand on it, is the child welfare system. The 60s scoop, which was a phenomena where Aboriginal children were removed wholesale from Aboriginal families and communities, placed a lot of children, and continue, actually, they call it the millennial scoop now. It happens across the board, and about half my practice is I represent First Nations in child welfare matters. And children continue to be needlessly removed from their families. And the fates of these children, they often end up as crown wards. They're adopted out into non-Aboriginal families, really high-functioning, loving, diligent, for the most part, non-Aboriginal families. They nevertheless, in very large numbers, they're more likely than not to leave the care of that family in their teens, in their adolescence, before they reach the age of majority. The studies, there's a number of different studies and scholarly articles on it. It's at least 50% of Aboriginal children placed with non-Aboriginal families on a permanent basis leave the care of those families. Some studies put it as high as 80 or 90%. You know, it's an area that needs further research, and we all know within the Aboriginal community, we all know former crown wards and former adoptees, and virtually all of them did leave the homes of their adoptive families. So, and once they end up on the street, they're tremendously vulnerable.
What was the term you used? The scoop? Is that what you called it?
60s scoop,
The
yes.
60s scoop?
Yes.
And that refers to?
From the 60s onwards, when children's aid organizations started to play a more prominent role, and the profession of social work really came into its own in child welfare. Child welfare authorities went in and removed, in many communities, virtually all of the children.
Scoop them up, in other
Scoop
words.
them often at birth or shortly after. Sometimes, you know, the children actually weren't safe, but in many cases it was because of poverty, socioeconomic reasons, or just blatant discrimination. So it continues to happen today that Aboriginal families are scrutinized, the subject of a lot of scrutiny by mainstream child welfare organizations and agencies, and children continue to be needlessly removed. So it's called the scoop.
Let's do what you suggested, Marion Schufleid. You want to follow up on that insofar as helping us understand when that scoop happens, what happens to these kids in the long term?
Well, as Catherine had mentioned, I work with youth right now, and we're starting to, that's when we see them show up on our doorsteps, is when they're of age, they turn 16, and then they have the ability to leave, and most of the time they will. So, but they will venture back and make their way back to the community, to the resources. So
Leave for what?
They will leave the homes that they're in, and typically the foster homes. But the way that I look at it and the work that we do, it's more they're searching for something. So I'd have to say that it's probably maybe the lack of identity or the cultural piece that's within the home. Whatever the structure, it doesn't matter, but it's vital to our survival and our resilience, making those connections. So I think that when you disconnect a child, or that child is disconnected naturally or otherwise, or for whatever reason, it's that understanding that, or that mentality that it's forever severed. And so culturally, we don't believe that there's ever a full disconnection. So in helping to sort of understand the end result of this history that we continue to come under and follow through, and we still have the child welfare. I think we're a little bit more open, but it's also education. It's just continuous education. A lot of it is just a lack of information about our history, about our culture, and the issues just continue to increase. It's multi-systemic. The issues are complex, and so it's not that they come in and they say we just have this one issue that we're dealing with. By the time that and we pray that they come and end up at least accessing our services and stay connected in the community, because we don't want them going missing. We don't want them to think that there isn't anywhere that they can't go.
But often when they show up, it's multiple things.
Yes.
It's not one thing.
Yes.
You spoke of the history. Can I talk to you, Bridgette, about history? Do you know anything about this scoop?
Yes, I'm a product of the 60 scoop myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, I also think that systemically, these children that are crown wards, us children that were placed as crown wards, are just set up for failure. We can age out at 16 years old out of care by our own omission, and there's nothing no one can do about it. And what happens is you come from a fractured community into a home, and the people that are receiving you aren't really prepared. They don't understand that there could be intergenerational trauma. There could be maybe that the child had been exposed to severe sexual abuse or severe dysfunction and poverty, that then these children have major issues and they're not prepared for. They're kind of sold on this healthy baby, and there's multitudes of layers. So what they do is they turn them back. So now that's double rejection. You're rejected from your biological, your community, you're placed in a home that's deemed appropriate, and then you're kind of shuffled off. That happened to me. I got lost in the system.
Let's just go back. You're from Thunder Bay.
I'm from Thunder Bay.
You were how old when you got scooped?
I was 5 weeks old.
And why were you taken away from your birth mother?
She just didn't have the money to sustain a second child, and she was in an abusive relationship. And there was dysfunction in the family, and she felt that it was better that I'd be placed in a non-native home. Actually, she recommended that. She
a non-native home?
Yeah.
Because she thought?
She thought that I'd have more of a chance.
A chance at what?
A chance of being taken from the reserve and maybe being able to go to school and living in a normal family. My parents were very... my adopted parents were good people. They just they weren't told that I had issues with fetal alcohol syndrome. They weren't given really the background. And when at 10 years old, I acted out, and they had no idea. And they did what the child welfare people told them to do, was basically to put me back into care and that they would take care of me. And from Children's Aid, I was lured out of right in the Children's Aid home, I was lured and procured into prostitution at 12 years old, where I remained till I was 21. And I am now an active abolitionist because of my experience, and I'm able to see what led up and what factored into me having that lifestyle.
Did you ever recapture a decent relationship with your parents or your sibling?
Oh, awesome. I have an awesome relationship with my parents. My parents are very proud of me. My biological family, there is total breakdown, but that's where they're at.
Okay, so when you say your parents, you mean your adoptive parents, and that's all good.
Yeah.
But your biological mother and father and sibling?
I am close with my biological siblings. I've kind of become a maternal figure. My mother, she suffered through the residential school, so I understand her place and I understand where she's at, and I accept it. All I can be is thankful that she gave me life.
Okay, thank you for sharing all that. That's a lot of very personal information. I want to move on to a testimony that took place before the Special Parliamentary Committee on Violence Against Indigenous Women. Lorna Martin, who is the daughter of Marie-Jean Saint-Sauveur, who was reported in 1987 to be missing, testified as to the following. One of the first questions the RCMP asked my sister was if she, my mother, drank. Arlene couldn't deny it. She didn't lie. She said yes. He said, they go on a drinking binge for 2 or 3 days and then they come back. When you're full of anxiety, you're hurting, it feels like a kick in the stomach or in the head when somebody you're asking for help says something like that. Right away, any chance of trust, any line of communication is, well, there's a barrier right there. You might as well put your hand up. There's no help there. They said our mum was a drunken Indian. Not sure where we go from this other than to say, Brenda Butterworth Carr, do you want to react to that testimony?
Yeah, and certainly we've heard stories such as that, and as I'd indicated previously, I think there's a recognition and acknowledgement of how investigations had occurred when information was initially being reported, and and stressing going forward that certainly in the last number of years there's a significant amount of energy around ensuring that we're taking every complaint organizationally, and in addition to the other law enforcement agencies across Canada, seriously. When information comes into police hands, that it's investigated thoroughly, that there's consistency around it, and again.
And are officers given anti-racism training or that kind of thing?
Yes, they are, and thank you for opening that, because a couple of points that I just wanted to respond to with regards to the solve rate. Certainly the research that we've undertaken organizationally with RCMP jurisdiction, we're looking at an 89% solve rate, 89% solve rate, which is fairly significant.
Sorry, who's the we in that case?
The other piece of that is with respect to...
Sorry, Brenda, who's the we? When you say we've got an 89% solve rate, is that you in Saskatchewan?
RCMP. No, RCMP generally across the organization. So the research that I was referencing earlier, what I was mentioning is that, about a year ago we were looking at reconciling all of our missing persons, our women that were missing and or murdered. And so another research, broader expansion of that has been taking place, and I suspect the results will be shared here within the next few months, and obviously directly with the Native Women's Association of Canada and so forth. But with regards to the missing and murdered homicide investigations that we've had, organizationally, the RCMP is looking at an 88% solve rate, so there's that component of it. With respect to the actual training, right from the time that our cadets are going through depot, there's an implementation of Indigenous awareness training. And to complement that is when all of the RCMP members are getting deployed in through the different communities, that there's furtherance of that training, and more specifically that we're going to community members in whichever community they happen to be stationed in, and ensuring that they're meeting with leadership and elders and youth and so forth. Can it get better? Absolutely.
Sure. Let me just get some reaction to that solve rate that you just suggested from Marion Pierce. An 89% solve rate is what the Assistant Commissioner of the RCMP from Saskatchewan is saying she can do. What's your understanding?
Well, when I was looking at the cases, I was looking at all cases of missing and murdered women writ large across Canada, but I was focusing on the most vulnerable, which was sex workers. And one of the things that I think we're not mentioning here is that when we're talking about stranger homicides, it's incredibly difficult to solve. One of the things that I did is looking at cases of serial homicides, serial killers that focus on sex workers in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K., looking for similarities and issues, and looking at those and finding the threads and the themes as well, because it's such a difficult work. I do agree that, in fact, I think that the Pickton case was a wake-up call throughout the country, and I've seen a lot of changes when I'm doing this research. The RCMP's EPANA, which began in 2005, Carr, which began in 2004, and Devote in 2009, are large-scale devoted projects. And not necessarily that there is a serial killer. There may be, there may not be, but these are potentially stranger missings or disappearances or homicides, very difficult to say to solve. And so these are very large dedicated projects that are doing that. So I think it's I don't have the solve rates from across Canada, and I don't dispute that number. I think when we're talking about the unsolved, we have to link it into the type of circumstances as well, because it does really make a difference, regardless of ethnicity. Those are very difficult homicides and disappearances to solve.
Right. Catherine Hansel, I don't want to let the media off the hook. We talked about it briefly just a few minutes ago, but let's go back to this. Why do you think, if so many missing Indigenous Canadian women or murdered Indigenous Canadian women, I mean, that's a story, and yet dozens and dozens and dozens and not much coverage, and one, which is a tragedy, I don't want to minimize it, but one white woman goes missing and is killed, front page news.
I think
Why?
I think it's part of the, it's been called by some commentators another form of the two solitudes in Canada, that First Nations people, Indigenous people are really not considered, and often don't even consider themselves, part of the body politic
of Canada,
of Canadian society. Yeah. So when Canadian society loses one of its own, the media, the public respond. There's a sense of other when it comes to Indigenous people. So there's that, a real sense, and an inability and a lot of inaccurate assumptions and information that several of the panelists have talked about the lifestyles of Indigenous women, the basis for their vulnerability, their own culpability, their community's culpability in it, as well as just flat out discrimination, that the perception, although it wouldn't be stated in the media in these terms, they'd be more finger pointing at the women themselves, or that their lives are actually worth less. Insofar as they are part of the body politic here, they're at the very bottom. We are at the very bottom. And you see that played out socioeconomically, culturally, and through education, certainly in the criminal justice system. Very discriminatory, concrete effects that have been recognized. Numerous public inquiries and commissions and study, and the Supreme Court of Canada doesn't dispute that there's real harmful discrimination against First Nations, Indigenous people in Canada, and it's an extension of that. It's all part and parcel.
Let me get Michelle Oded on that. How infuriating is it to you, Michelle, when you read the newspapers of this country and you see enormous coverage of perhaps crimes that take place in the white world, but in the Indigenous world, not so much?
Well, I think it's just a continuation of the ignorance, the racism, or like exactly what you just said about were not even considered. But I would like to say that I think enough is enough. Some will say idle no more, or some will say we want a national public inquiry. For me, I think what will be crucial, I think organizations in the cities or in the communities are doing amazing work to prevent or save life. But at the same time, if we keep doing that kind of talk and discussion, in 10 years or the next generation, we'll have more women on those databases, either the NWAC one or RCMP, etc. I think there's a political willingness that needs to happen for the next federal election. It's crucial, where yes, an inquiry will be there. Yes, we will have a plan of action to make sure that the federal, the provincial, the territorial governments, but also the municipalities and the organization who try to save life at the on the ground will have a common approach where let's prevent. Let's prevent. So by either having economic opportunity, decent housing, there's many things that we can do. I don't want to come back and say to my twins' daughters, well, I try, I try my best, like Bridgette did, like the other women did. No. It's a matter that Canadian people, the politician, and First Nation and Métis and Inuit has to say, let's sit down together, and for real this time.
Let's pursue this angle. Bridgette, what would be the value of having a public inquiry into the hundreds, if not thousands, of missing or murdered Indigenous women?
Well, I think we need a national inquiry first, and I think we need to call in other countries to kind of facilitate it. We also need to look at terminology surrounding women and vulnerable women, just like the term sex worker. It paints a picture that these women are wanting to be sold as sex workers. We also need to look around that and start using the proper terminology as prostituted women, as exploited women, as vulnerable women. The media's portrayal on these women, I lived with having a child whose mother was murdered, so I would be routinely screened by the school, by other parents, due to the media, by not letting their child participate in activities with my daughter, who, and it would baffle me because as a mother, I would see her, I saw my child struggle with her own identity as an Aboriginal youth, and then now to have the scarlet letter put on, casted on her. We also, with this whole national inquiry, I think there needs to be accountability, and I think, the RCMP, the Vancouver PD, everyone's kind of pacifying us, the families, with these apologies, but they're not even, they're just words. What about these detectives that didn't really do their job, and and they didn't do their job, and it was said at the missing women inquiry, we're sorry, what about, they're rewarded, they got full paid pensions, and we're holding the gauntlet. It cost me $20,000 to get my daughter help. And that's money that I can't get back. I had to pay for her to get help because she was so damaged from the inquiry.
It sounds, Marion Pierce, as if just having an inquiry to hear these stories would be of great value. What beyond that would you like to see from a national inquiry?
Well, as Michelle was talking about, you know, about the having been, you know, adding to the databases, to the numbers. You know, one thing that I try to keep in mind too is that by the time it comes to the police, the attention of the police, in, you know, and obviously in a few cases or some cases, you know, 93% of people who go missing are found within the first 2 weeks, so that's good. But by the time a woman is murdered or there's a long-term missing, it's too late, and that prevention piece is really, really important.
I wonder, Marianne Schufly, if there would be some Indigenous Canadians who, even if the federal government were to say, okay, we'll set up this public inquiry, whether they would look at it with suspicion, because after all, it would be an inquiry of the government of Canada, and there are many Indigenous Canadians who aren't thrilled with the government of Canada. I don't have to tell you. Would that skepticism be a problem, do you think?
Yes, I think it's going to be a problem because we have, rightfully so, every reason to be suspicious. Everything that we've asked for so far, even in terms of other reviews, have been typically set up by the government or the municipality or whatever the body is that's is offering those, and then only to have people come to the door to come in and share their stories, for example, under the guise believing that this is going to be bringing something to the table, but then finding out because it was constructed in such a way they were very limited, and their hands were tied essentially in what they were able to say. So I think that when you're talking about bringing awareness, I mean, there's other ways to do that, but I think it's for us, we have to make sure that it's very clear what is it that we're trying to do. Because I think there's many layers here when you think about information and public inquiries. And one, we also have to remember who would be putting this in place, who would be developing the policies and the procedures around it, how would it unfold.
Well, we got a lawyer beside you. Let's ask her. If you're going to set up the terms of reference of a national inquiry into this issue, what would you want it to do?
I'd want to make sure that there was robust and very real engagement of Indigenous people, Indigenous women's groups, that was a mandatory part of the protocols, procedures, and the terms of reference. We've seen in several public inquiries. I was Assistant Commission Counsel at the Ipperwash inquiry, and there was a fair balance there of Indigenous parties and representation. Unfortunately, since that time, there's been numerous inquests and public inquiries where the role that were purportedly to specifically address losses suffered by Indigenous people, including the Missing and Murdered Women's Inquiry and the Paul Sinclair inquest in the Sinclair inquest in Winnipeg. It had similar, where all the Indigenous groups had to withdraw because, well, 3 different police forces at the Missing and Murdered Women's Inquiry had publicly funded counsel, for example, two levels of government. The Attorney General for British Columbia determined that none of the Indigenous groups needed lawyers there. So they withdrew. And similarly, at the Sinclair inquest in Winnipeg, the Indigenous groups have attempted to withdraw because of severe constraints on the evidence that can be called concerning the realities of Indigenous people.
That presumably taints the process, taints the findings, taints the recommendations.
The integrity of the process, and the perception on the part of Indigenous people that that the commission or inquest knows, the public inquiry knows, has accurate information from Indigenous people about Indigenous people, because otherwise what you have is a bunch of police forces and governments speculating, really, about, and it's for their own purposes. Let
me go to the Commissioner in Regina. Do you or the RCMP have a view on whether this kind of inquiry ought to take place?
I wouldn't necessarily say I have an opinion. I would say, though, however, if one did occur, that it would really focus on, you know, the elements that Michelle brought forward, or even that Mary spoke to when you were talking about, and, you know, the other panelists, the societal issues. I mean, law enforcement is one component of it, and this isn't about deflecting or mitigating the responsibility of providing, you know, safety in our Aboriginal or Indigenous communities or communities across Canada. This is about really dealing with the prevention and, you know, ensuring that our women are not going missing in the first place or being victims of homicide, and that, you know, there's many other agencies that have a role to play, whether it's education, whether it's health and social services,
give us
whether
one
it's
idea
family
on
and child
prevention.
Services.
Give us one idea on prevention. One thing.
So with respect to prevention, raising that awareness, and so I would say community mobilization. We have many elements of that within Saskatchewan and a variety of other contract provinces across Canada, so provinces and territories. When we look at what are our youth and intervening prior to them getting into any of the judicial system or in their contact with law enforcement agencies, but we work with education, we work with child and family services, we work with communities, we work with families, in that holistic approach, so that we're actually looking at how we can ensure and provide, a good path for some of our youth, and replicating that in many of our other areas. And I also reference another preventative initiative that we're invested in a collaboration again with the Native Women's Association, our hitchhiking campaign, and looking at how we can raise awareness and education. And certainly with our vulnerable population, we recognize that many of our women and young females, their only method of transportation is by hitchhiking. But to raise the awareness around that and recognition that that is a high-risk behavior and that they can be that much more vulnerable. So whether there's in addition to the prevention and awareness of it, is there opportunities to engage with transportation and help facilitate.
You know what? Let me follow up on that one thing, just as you mentioned it, because hitchhiking, you almost never see it anymore. Have you had to hitchhike during the course of your life? Is that
yes.
Once you did it?
Yes.
Yes, Marion? Okay, how about you? Yes? Bridgette, yes, you have hitchhiked?
Yeah.
Was it your main method of transportation for a long time?
Well, when I lived in a rural setting, that was the only way we could get in town.
Marion Pierce, how about you?
Yeah, when I was my late teens, I lived in Whistler, and that was the only way to get around at that point. In fact, they had hitchhiking posts carved out by the snowplows, and you stood in line, and that was the only way to do it. Now, Whistler's a fairly wealthy area, as you know, and so I think in the years or two after I left, now they have a transportation system, but in other areas of northern BC, that is the only way you get around. I never hitchhiked in my life before that.
You too?
That was scary.
Yeah, I've hitchhiked actually on the Trail of Tears during the period when there were so many losses. I was both an Aboriginal woman hitchhiking and a tree planter, as it happened.
I got to ask you about that. You hitchhiked on the Trail of Tears.
I didn't know it was called that then, yeah. And there were a lot of women hitchhiking, and it was easy to get rides, very easy to get rides.
Did you?
I didn't have any ill effects, fortunately. But
Anybody tell you after the fact that was not a really good idea?
I later became aware of that, and Bridgette lived in Vancouver during the time that Pickton was at work. I was also living a very marginalized existence in Vancouver at the same time. So, I have both Bridgette and I have some, we're counting our lucky stars, but our experience is fairly typical amongst, I think, Indigenous women.
Okay.
And it brings it down to the point of, we need to look at who's killing these women, and it's men. It's not women, it's men. And we need to look at the focus on who these men are, and where's the campaign for men not to pick up hitchhikers or men not to buy sex. Like, these, I do firmly believe that these lives would have been saved if we had a system in place in Canada that protected vulnerable women.
You know what? We've got about 30 seconds left here, and I want to ask you just one last personal question, if I can. Your daughter, Angel, is how old now?
Angel's 20 years old.
How's she doing?
Great. She has a house. She's in a stable relationship. She's actually thinking of becoming a police officer.
Wow.
Put her in touch with Brenda in Regina.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you worry about her?
No, I don't worry about her because she's been reared by a really strong feminist. So, and she knows where she is at as an Aboriginal youth, and as a Pickton victim orphan, she has rallied along with the other orphans, and they've become a quite good network together, and she's kind of seen as a mentor.
Okay, we look forward to seeing her in uniform someday.
Yeah.
Can I thank you all for participating in tonight's discussion? Brenda Butterworth Carr in Regina from the RCMP, Michelle Oded in Sept-Îles, Quebec from the Native Women's Association of Canada, Marion Pierce, University of Ottawa in our nation's capital, and back here in our studios, Catherine Hansel from Hansel Barristers, Marianne Schufly from the Native Child and Family Services of Toronto, Bridgette Pierce, Sex Trade 101. Appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.